As I share the screen, I want first of all to sort of remind us where we've been and where we're going. So,
You want everybody to mute.
yes, if everybody will mute, and we'll go through this. First, let's talk about, of course, the introduction, and that this is my way I opened up as the plan of love. We went to chapter one where we had introduction and mostly introduction. Then we moved forward last week to look at the promise of love as we looked at the text. And today, of course, we're going to look at one of my favorite parts, which is the provision of love and how this chapter unfolds, demonstrating to us how God makes provisions for us. And then next week, the price of love. And of course, for me, it's important that we recognize that love does not come to us ultimately in life nor in death without a price. And of course, we know that in life we pay a lot of different kinds of prices in order to walk a path of love. And then, of course, ultimately, Jesus became our Redeemer, which is reflected in this story as Boaz becomes and is the kinsman redeemer. And then we will conclude with how God protects us by his love. There'll be several things that I've prepared for you that you'll not be able to hear, but I'll explain it because I'm going to have to get with Mike, who is an expert on this, to see how exactly I need to overcome the barriers that I've faced. But let's look first at the area. This is a modern day picture of a farm in Bethlehem, and you're looking down, from a hill and looking across, and you can just imagine what is. It's amazing how modern Israel is, and we look and we see the various, obviously trees, probably different fruit trees that are in place, but that's not how it looked in the day of Ruth. This is probably a similar picture of the day of Ruth as they were gleaning in the fields. Those of us who have been raised in an agrarian background know this kind of feel. I'll point this out because I think it's important that we see the terrain. The place is important in terms of the very elevations. You moving from the sea, the Mediterranean Sea, eastward. You first have the coastal plains, which are very fertile, a lot of area for growth. Then you move into the hill country, which we all know that Jerusalem is approximately 2,600 feet. I think it rises a little above 2,600 feet. But when we speak of going to Jerusalem, it is always going up, even though from Galilee it would be going south. It is up because of the elevation. And you can imagine how the winds blowing would come up over that hill and down into both the Dead Sea, but also the Sea of Galilee. And we read the stories of how the Sea of Galilee could be very tumultuous sea of kind of sea. Then you move down into the Dead Sea, and the Sea of Galilee is called the Rift Valley, and then up on the other side, the east side of the Dead Sea, you have the Transjordanian Mountains, which south east is where Moab is. But I'm going to show you another view that might help you also to see that this is uh, a topographical map that you'll not be able to hear the sound, but if it will eventually come on, I'm going to, and if it won't, okay, well, let me move back one more. Okay. I want to show you some of the areas. This is a guide showing you the various areas that we're going to look at. Uh, excuse me. Let me go back again. Okay. You look up to the north, and you see that Mount Hermon, which is probably about 9,000 feet. To the right of there is the Golan Heights, which some say that becomes the eye of Israel. Then you move, if you look at number 4, you're in the Jezreel Valley, but north of there is the upper Galilee region where Jesus spent, well, he was raised in Nazareth, then he went on up to Capernaum. But you see the elevation in a way that the other maps don't show you. And I'll show you one more map that's similar that shows you the elevation. I just want you to get a picture of what it was like for them to travel. When they were traveling, they would go just above the Dead Sea and by the region of Jericho and down, which was about a week's travel probably. Uh, uh, and it's rugged territory. Well, we'll move on. I'll show you another elevation map. Let's see. Hold on just a moment. Okay, here's another elevation map. You look up at the left, you'll see the colors that show the green at sea level, and then it moves upward. And the mountains around that area are somewhere in the region of 500 to 1,000 feet. So there's pretty big drop off as they are making these trips. But this is, Mount Hermon is over 9,000 feet, and you've got the Dead Sea, which at the bottom of the Dead Sea is over 1,400 feet below sea level, which is the lowest place on Earth. So you got a lot of contrast there when you think about the area. I wanted to answer Art's question from last week. We were talking about the age that Ruth would have been, and Mike was exactly right when he said he's in the area of 20s, but she could have been young as 23. The marriageable age at that time was 12, 13 years of age. They were in Moab 10 years, so she could have been a very young woman when she was coming out of Moab. It's hard for us to imagine that. But according to the Midrash, Ruth was 40 years old, and that was why she was urgent about wanting to be married in order to have a child. Now, of course, you look at the Midrash is the genre of rabbinic literature consisting of narratives and commentaries on the Tanakh, which is, you remember, that is the reference to the Torah, and that's how the Jews refer today to their reading, and they call it the Tanakh, which the T, the K, and the T, the K, and the A. Let's see, I forget. I believe T, K, and H stand for the law, and then the writings, and then the prophets. But that's where that information comes from in regards to her age. But also, Terry asked a question about weren't the Jews forbidden to marry? And the Jews were forbidden to marry a Gentile woman, and we'll see one of these texts later. These are references to that. And then it points out that there was a day in Moses' day when these women seduced the men, and they came from Moab. Here's the reference from Deuteronomy, no Ammonite or Moabite shall be admitted to the assembly of the Lord, even to the 10th generation. None of their descendants shall be admitted to the assembly of the Lord. And there'll be another reference you'll see later. Today, we're looking at love's provision. Now, the text beginning says, now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing. Now, that is the word that we spoke about, Ayel, which is a word which we'll further see describing strength, wealth, and I think there's one more description from him. But he was a man of standing. Now, most of you know that my brother Bill is on the listening today as well. He and I had some very important men in our life that were men of standing. Both sides of our family, both my grandfather Wallace and Herring, even though they were not socially elite, nor did any of us have any money, they were men of character. And if you knew either of those men, they were men of standing. Our father was as well. So I'm sure that you have men in your life that were men of standing who were recognized for their character. And that was the kind of man that we'll see throughout. And Boaz, of course, is that man that's pointed out. But Ruth, in declaring her character, as it unfolds, she says, let me go to the fields and pick the leftover grain. Later, we'll see that she was putting herself in the path of blessing by that statement. Also, she said, I want to find favor in the eyes of the owner of the field. So she was concerned that she would do her part and as out of the character of her life. Boaz, of course, becomes and is the owner of the field. Ruth is a gleaner in the field. They're quite contrasting. Boaz was a man of great standing in the community. Ruth was a foreigner, a Moabite that came into the community. So there's quite a contrast in the two, but both were people of character. An important part of this whole puzzle is that Boaz looked at Ruth and said, that's my mother's story. In the genealogy, we recognize that Rahab, and I'll show you that in a moment from Matthew, is included in the genealogy of Christ. Rahab, as you remember from the Joshua, I believe it's 6 and 7, Rahab was the harlot, a prostitute that protected and saved the spies that came into the land that were being sought. And she protected them, put them in her house, then let them down by a cord. And there's a comparison between that event and that of Paul, of Jesus, when he was escaping the city once. But Rahab, like Ruth, comes from not so good a background, but it's to show us that through common people who come to know God, he is able to use each of us. Rahab became a follower and a believer of the God represented in Jehovah, as did Ruth. So it is a way that God is providing in this story. Ruth meets Boaz in the field. But before that, let me show you that passage from Matthew, Matthew 1:5. Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth, Obed, the father of Jesse. Now, we'll revisit that. And to me, that was one of the most important discoveries that I made about the Ruth years ago, that this little book is the piece in the puzzle that brings us to the Redeemer Jesus Christ. Without these characters, we would not have our Redeemer. In answer to the question, Lena and I were discussing the question that I asked, was it disobedience that brought Elimelech, Naomi, and Mahlon and Chilion to the land of Moab? Well, in one way, some see it as a disobedience, but as this story shows us, and we'll spend some time on this, it is a matter of God working through these characters. And as a result, even if it was disobedience, God worked it for the good of us. So we have Naomi and Boaz appearing on the scene, a man of standing, and this is the definition of Gibor Hayel, mighty man, wealthy, a man of standing, valor, noble character. So that's the kind of man that Boaz is. And Ruth said, "Let me go to the field and glean." And this is what is pointed out by Brad Gray, that we'll see in a moment. She was putting her in the path of blessings. Oftentimes we think, we turn it over to God, but we have to remember that we must do our part. It was Augustine who said we are to work as if everything depends on us and pray as if everything depends on God. As a result of that, we put ourselves in the path of his blessings. Now, verse 3, and so she went out, entered a field, and began to glean behind the gleaners. As it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. Now, the important thing is that this is the revelation of what we discussed last week. It just so happened that this occurred. It just so happened that occurred. We're going to discuss the difference between miracle and providence shortly. Verse 4, just then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you. The Lord bless you," they answered. Now, that was not a common greeting that I encountered on working in a construction project. However, this reveals further the nature of Boaz. He obviously was a kind and a very honorable man. And every day we use the word miracle, oftentimes inappropriately. We describe events as miracles when really they are the providence of God. All the time that we are living, God is working in our life, and I believe it is the providence that he is revealing. That is, he is always in the background, similar to what we've described in terms of the system that works, this computer and your computer. There's always a system working in the background. Well, God is at work providentially. Belinda would know the area where I came from there, and where we served in Vienna. The church began as Mount Beezer Church. Then it became the Providence Baptist Church. Then it became the First Baptist Church of Vienna. And today they have a social hall that they call Providence Hall. all of which is a result of understanding of the word providence. And so providence is at work in our life. That is the working of God in natural events to bring about good for us. A miracle is an occurrence that one cannot explain in terms of physical things. It is a direct act of God apart from anything that we might be able to identify as describe as us being a part of what occurred. So Boaz greeted his harvesters in a way that honored God, honored him, honored them. And this is what Brad says, that we need to put ourselves in the path of a blessing. And that comes when we, like Ruth, step out and say, let me do my part. And God will allow his blessings to flow on us as we do our part. The law of reaping in that day provided for those to go in the field and reap. When you reap in your harvest, I can't see the other word, field, and forget a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back to get it. Speaking to the owners, it shall be for the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow, that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. Some have said that as much as 25% was left, that God was teaching the owners to be generous, and also it became a part of the system of welfare. This is a reference that to what I read to you earlier about Salmon, the father of Boaz. By chance, Boaz was born to a woman who was of real ill repute, but became a part of the family and the lineage of our Lord. Boaz was such character that when the temple was built, there was a pillar named Boaz. He had that kind of reputation in the history of Israel. This is an inside view, and the text from 1 Kings 7:21. He erected the pillars at the portico of the temple. The pillar to the south he named Jachin, and the one to the north he named Boaz. That would not have occurred if Boaz's name had not been well respected in the religious community. These are the passages regarding the gleaning. One passage says that they are not to go to the corners of their field. Now, for you and me, it depends on, I guess, where we were raised. The way that Bill and I were raised is that it's hard to manage about whether you're being greedy or whether you're just providing for. We learned that nothing went to waste, and I have a notion most of you did as well. So, there's a balance between being greedy or making sure that things are not wasted. But these are the passages related to that. It was their way of God's way, welfare system of taking care of people in need that day. If you're willing to work, he said, there's provision for you, but you got to do your part. Boaz asked the overseer of his harvesters, who does that young woman, who does that young woman belong to? Now, you see the little icon, you'll not be able to hear it, but it was my imagination. Vernon McGee said that the interpretation for Hebrew for this question was, and he'll not be able to hear it, but he gave a wolf whistle. He said that Boaz looked at Ruth and said, "Wow, she's hot." And he said he was often asked the question, "Do you believe in love at first sight?" And he says, "Yes, I do. On my when I saw my wife, I said, that's the woman that I'm going to marry. And I asked her out for a date. And then I asked her out for a second date when I proposed to her. He said I would have proposed on the first date, but I was afraid she would have thought I was being too forward. So he says that Boaz immediately recognized that she was for him. But again, verse 6 reminds us of what Ruth wore on as a part of her background. That is, she is a Moabite. The overseer pointed out she is a Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi. And she seemed to always have that thrown up in her face every time she lived. But we'll find it, ultimately she even moves beyond that herself. Verse 7, she said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves. Now, one person points out how she was so polite. Please do this. Please let me do that. Very polite. And of course, in our part of the world, that's recognized, and other places in the United States come to the South to interview kids to come to the West Coast to be in camps because they are so polite. Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvests. She was not asking for any special privilege, but she knew the law and she knew that this was a requirement of the law, asking only for what the law provided for her. She came into the field and has remained here from morning till now, except for among the sheaves from morning until now, except for a short rest in the shelter. So in her work habits, she demonstrated even there the kind of person she was. She was a woman of character, just like Boaz was a man of character. Here is pointed out to us the picture of Ruth revealing her character. Work hard, work smart, do it with integrity, and people will recognize that. All of us are out of the workforce, but nonetheless, that is a good thing to pass on to your loved ones, particularly young people. Verse 8, so Boaz said to Ruth, my daughter, listen, don't go to another, let me see if I can, I've got my something. Well, I can't move it. You'll have to, I can't see that last word. To another field and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where men are harvesting and follow after the women. I have told the men to not lay a hand on you, and whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled. That was Boaz assuming the role of Ruth's protector. However, the unseen hand of God is protecting and providing for both Ruth and Boaz. At this, she bowed down with her face to the ground and asked, why have you found such favor in your eyes that you notice a foreign woman? I think that says. But what is occurring here is she is paying respect. Chuck Swindoll, whom I would recommend you hear, if nothing else, just to hear him laugh. He says that Ruth bowing to the ground is a sign of a good woman, as he chuckles. And he says to the women in his sermon, Now, come on, ladies, you know I'm just kidding. Pointing out uh, his humor, and I would recommend you listening to him. Boaz replied, I have been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. Now you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with people you did not know before. Again, Ruth revealing her character. It is well known. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded. The God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Now we know that that is a phrase, metaphor describing protection. God is providing for both Ruth, Naomi, and Boaz for both protection and provision in this. That is a description of a hen who gathers her chickens under her wings at the sign of trouble. And so he is reminding her that he will be her protector. And we'll see in the next chapter another cultural thing that is done in that ancient day that reveals this as well. Verse 13, may I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord, she said. You have put me at ease by speaking kindly to your servant. Now, see how she was observing, even how he, I'm sure, greeted those before her, and then how he is showing that kind of respect for her. Though she says in the last phrase, though I do not have standing of one of your servants, but yet she is gaining that standing in her own rights and by her behavior and her character. At mealtime, verse 14, Boaz said to her, come over here, have some bread and dip it in the wine vinegar. When she sat down with the harvesters, he overheard her. He offered her some roasting grain. She ate all she wanted and had some left over. Now I can say for Bill and myself, leftovers are a part of our life. When we sat at the table with 6 children and mother and daddy, there were very few leftovers. So he and I both like leftovers. That's our story. My mother took in a little girl whose mom had cancer. We made a place for her at our table. And when she came to the first meal and she saw all of us and the food on the table and we were passing it around, she said, almost in tears, save me some, because she saw how far that meal had to go. Well, I'm impressed about what Naomi does with her leftovers. We'll see that shortly. That's our story. To me, that looks like a very lavish meal to be out in the desert, portrayed in the movie that I took this picture from. As she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men. Let her gather among the sheaves and don't reprimand her. And let also, I want to read this particular passage, next verse 16 from the King James, because it says something that I want to illustrate. And let fall also some of the handfuls of purpose for her, and leave them that she may glean them and rebuke her not. You'll be able to read at the bottom the NIV translation. The words handfuls of purpose is the title to a book collection that I had for many years before I had to give up my books. It was a book series of commentary written in 1862 by James Stewart that comes from this particular phrase. But I like to illustrate this. When we were coming up, we didn't know until we were grown that you could have chicken and dumplings with white meat in it. All we had were the bones that were left over for necks and backs and things of that nature to make chicken and dumplings. There was more broth than there was chicken. But when Wileen goes on her annual cooking spree for preparation for the children, I make sure that I'm close by because she lets me lick the pan, and I still love to lick the pan. And whenever she brings me a bowl and I see a glob of whatever she's making sweet, I know that she has dropped me a handful on purpose. Every day we can look about us at the blessings that God has given us. And I dare say that every one of us can see where God has dropped in our pathway a handful of his mercy and grace on purpose. All we'd have to do is recognize it and take advantage of it when it's dropped in our pathway. And that's what Ruth recognized, that she was being provided for at the direction of Boaz, that those workers dropped on purpose additional sheaves that she would have more in abundance than perhaps even those working alongside of her. So handfuls on purpose is an important aspect of my life. And Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed the barley she had gathered, and it amounted to an ephah. Ephah, I guess is pronunciation. Well, some have measured it in different ways, but I like just to describe it as being enough for 2 weeks, which is a great amount of food. According to one person I listened to, it was as much as 90 kilograms, I believe he said, which is, I don't know exactly how to put that into gallons, but according to him, it was fill a jar large enough for someone to be in. Now, to me, that seems like an awful lot. I like to think more of it as being an apron full, enough for 2 weeks. But the barley in the first harvest, you remember, is barley, and the wheat harvest comes weeks afterward. So this grain was really the grain for the poor. Verse 18, she carried it back to town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gathered. Ruth also brought out and gave her what she had left over after she had eaten enough. That is what I say to my granddaughter, and of course, Wileen has set this example. Our granddaughter gave some gifts to us this past Christmas, that I describe as thoughtful giving. Well, when I look at Ruth, to me, that was very thoughtful, as I've seen that demonstrated so many times in my life, that someone would bring me something, even if it were leftovers, fearing that Naomi didn't have enough to eat. So it's a beautiful picture to me. And we value, and should, or at least I value, leftovers in my life. Take these and place them over, in the field over there. That is, Boaz is giving that command. Verse 19, her mother-in-law asked her, "Where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." I have a little video that that I can't play for you because the arrangements, but it's a short video uh, out of the oh, I can't think of the where it comes from. And these are the phrases. Well, somebody has to arrange the matches. Young people can't decide these things for themselves. She might bring some wonderful someone interested and well off and important. Matchmaker, matchmaker, make a match, find a find, and catch a catch. Uh, and that's what Naomi woke up to. Uh, and you can see from that there was a light going off in her head, and it's revealed. Then Ruth told her mother-in-law about the one at whose place she had been working. The name of the man I work with today is Boaz, she said. And I'm sure at that word there was that light bulb, and Naomi was beginning to see that her work was beginning to pay off. She says, "The Lord bless him." Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, he has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead. She added, and you'll have to read that next phrase because I got the block. I guess the kinsman close relative. He is the one of our guardian redeemer. Now, the word she used for kindness is chesed, which is loving kindness, that covenant love that comes from God. And then the word guardian redeemer, most translations just simply say that he was the kinsman redeemer. The word is goel, which is the translation and means kinsman redeemer. And we'll look in a moment at what that's all about. Then Ruth the Moabite said, he even said to me, stay with my workers until they finish harvesting all my grain. But there's an ointment in the fly. There's a fly in the ointment. The law of the kinsman redeemer was a Leviric law saying that a close kinman would step in and be the person who would take over a widow of a family member to continue the legacy and name of the family. And that's what Boaz is. However, there's one that will be revealed later that is closer than Boaz. And of course, I know you've read ahead, but I'll not go into that right now because that is, again, one more of the happenstances that's seen in this particular story. And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, it will be good for you, my daughter, to go with the women who work for him, because in someone else's field you might be harmed. And Ruth stayed close to the women of Boaz to glean until the barley and wheat harvest were finished. And she lived with her mother-in-law. Now, I call this waiting for the flower to bloom. That's not easy. Waiting for the plan to unfold. Waiting for God to do his work. And she was living with Naomi, that is, Ruth was living with Naomi while all of this was unfolding. Now, some observations that I want to make is, first of all, while Ruth is gleaning, while Boaz is gleaming, while Naomi is gloating, that is, she's seeing the plan of God working, and she said, oh, I'm the matchmaker. I'm helping this to take place. While all this was taking place, behind the scene, God is guiding. Now, the provision and the protection that comes in your life and mine is played out in this narrative. And I think that's something that we need to take note of. So